Joanna Ossinger with Fox Business. How do you feel about New York Attorney General Cuomo's findings that then Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson kept the SEC in the dark about these conversations with Ken Lewis about public disclosure or no public disclosure about the Bank of America negotiations with the government over its purchase of Merrill Lynch? And what, if anything, are you guys doing right now about looking into Bank of America's failure to disclose the losses at Merrill until after the shareholder vote?
Well, let me take the last part first. I think we've already said publicly that we are looking very closely at the quality, quantity, and timing of disclosure with respect to the Merrill Lynch bonuses, and I really don't have more to say on that subject right now. On the first piece of it, you know, I don't know the facts underlying this. Obviously, it took place before I arrived at the SEC, and I'm sure we'll learn, all of us, a lot more about in terms of the details around that. I think, I guess I'd say I find it troubling that the SEC might have been deliberately excluded, but we need to remember that the SEC has quite a different role in the world of financial regulation than the cabinet agencies do, like Treasury, or than the Fed does. Disclosure by companies of material information is the lifeblood of our capital markets. If we don't have companies disclosing, and I'm not opining here, to be clear, on whether Merrill should have disclosed or B of A should have disclosed the bonuses, but in generalities, disclosure is the lifeblood of the capital markets. It is what makes our markets as successful as they have been for many, many years. There is no system in the world that exceeds ours when it comes to disclosure. And that is something worth fighting for and worth preserving. And I think something that I feel really very deeply, as does the entire SEC staff, and I will say I think the entire Alumni Association of the SEC feels equally strongly about. And whether those, but those obligations to disclose rest squarely on the shoulders of the companies, and the SEC is willing to work with people to make sure that they meet their disclosure obligations. But at the end of the day, that is for the companies to disclose and the burden that they have to undertake. So the decision to disclose or not disclose actually doesn't rest necessarily with the Treasury Secretary or the Chairman of the Fed. That begs the question of why they explicitly excluded the SEC Chairman. And I don't really know the answer to that.
Okay, thank you.
Chuck Epstein, freelancer, Sacramento. It's a question on 12B1 fees for mutual funds.
Yes.
And mutual funds traditionally are abusing these fees by keeping share expenses high in the funds. And I think the traditional purpose of 12B1s was to reduce those expenses for shareholders, but now they're being used to prop up marketing departments and other marketing efforts. What's the SEC doing to try to make sure that those 12B1 fees are used appropriately and more fully disclosed in the Webster's Dictionary definition of the term disclosure, as opposed to burying them in a prospectus?
It's a great question, and let me say I've been there 3 months, and my usual response is I'm dancing as fast as I can. We have post-Madoff reforms, we have post-reserve fund breaking the buck reforms, we have reconstituting the enforcement program, we have a lot of internal organizational things that are going on. None of that is to suggest that 12B1 fees aren't still important or aren't still very much on our agenda. And I know much was made out of a speech given by our investment management director that he didn't think it was going to get done this year. I guess I would be a little more hesitant to say that, but we will absolutely be looking at it. And all fees and disclosure related to mutual funds. I don't know where we'll land. I have 4 colleagues on the commission who also have a vote. But it is not, in any sense of the word, off the table for the SEC to deal with 12B1 fees.
Yes,
Henry Dubroff, Pacific Coast Business Times. Just to follow up on the question from my colleague who was standing in front of me, we're in a period where it looks like the government, either the Treasury or the Federal Reserve, is going to be a shareholder and a market participant in the public markets for an extended period of time. Do you think there needs to be some rule making or some new rules of the road about how the government agencies disclose what they're doing with their investments in order to avoid conflicts with you? And if you can't do that, does that just leave the state attorneys generals as the kind of disclosure vehicle of last resort? And finally, really quick, would you apply the same caveat to the B of A Merrill bonuses that same caveat to the B of A countrywide transaction, which is of some parochial interest to me because of our circulation? So.
Well, I actually think your question really points out exactly why an independent agency like the SEC is absolutely essential in this day and age. We are not conflicted. We don't own the stock of any financial institution. Our rules are clear. The obligations we place upon them for disclosure are clear and time-tested and well understood, and we are there to enforce those obligations and those requirements. And so I think that as the government goes through this period of necessary, I think, immersion in our financial institutions, it is ever more important that there be an agency that is independent, that is refereeing the disclosure obligations and enforcing the rules and requirements.
And
I've forgotten the rest of the question. I'm sorry.
Attorneys general and broader inquiry into B of A, especially the countrywide transaction.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment, sorry, on any specific inquiries or investigations. I will say that I think one of the, we're working with, in a completely unrelated area, and you've all reported on this, Attorney General Cuomo's office on, for example, the issues with respect to bribery in the New York State Comptroller's office. I believe very much, given the size of the SEC and how small we are and how limited our resources are, that we have to be willing to work in partnership with state attorneys general, with the Department of Justice, the FBI, the SIG-TARP, as I mentioned, in order to leverage our resources and our ability to have the maximum amount of impact. And so as a general matter, without commenting on countrywide or B of A, I think it's really important for us to be in a position, wherever possible, to work with states' attorney general.
I'm going to violate my own rule of trying to ask one question at a time and ask two, so I apologize. But they're related, at least. One is, does the SEC have any current estimate of what the real losses in the Madoff scheme are? And two, how do you see the SEC overseeing what the Securities Investor Protection Corporation is going to be able to do to make investors whole? Will they have enough money?
Let me take the last one first. SIPC will have enough money, but understand SIPC's ability to reimburse investors is limited, and so your actual losses in many cases here will not be covered. They'll be covered up to the SIPC limitation. But SIPC has multiple mechanisms for funding, including lines of credit and a draw at the federal treasury. So we feel confident SIPC will not run out of money in this context. Your first question was on the current estimate of losses in Madoff. You know, I don't off the top of my head. That's not to say that our staff who are working day and night on these issues now couldn't give you one. Part of the question is, how do you measure losses? Is it the amount of money I paid in as an investor minus any draws I took out? Or is it the amount of money I thought I had earned on my investment over time based on, allegedly, more than allegedly fraudulent account statements that I received over 5 or 10 or 15 years? And so I think those two numbers are likely to be quite different, but I don't know what they are.
Thank you.